Hello everyone, welcome to Rogue's Reads. Rogue decided to actually join us today. He does like to be read too. So I'm going to set the camera up. He's going to hang out with us and listen to the story. Oh, there I am. Hopefully everybody is doing well today. It is day 3 of The Genius Files by Dan Gutman. Move back into my place here. All right, so I think we're ready now. So Rogue is here with me. He's a very big cat. So this is his book club because he really does like to be read to. He's a strange one. And actually Daisy Ray is sitting up right behind me on the couch. So she's here to do her book club as well. All right, so hopefully everybody's caught up. I'm ready for day 3. When we left off, Coke and Pepsi had just decided that someone was trying to kill them. That's pretty serious. I mean, hopefully we never have anybody trying to kill us. But who? Why? They're just 12-year-old kids. They're just living their lives. Get ready for summer break and this big road trip. So we're about to find out what's going on, at least a little more backstory. Before I start reading today, I would like to, just a quick reminder, it's not even a reminder, just mentioning this. This book was actually published in 2011. So the events that are occurring that kind of put this whole thing into motion are from September 11th, 2001. So when this book was written, that was only about 10 years ago. Now we're approaching that happening 20 years ago. So, you know, the time scale is a little bit off. Something else that was mentioned was Pepsi was updating Coke's iPod. And I say iPods were like a new technology when I was younger, but I know a lot of you guys don't even know what that is anymore. Used to be we carried separate devices for phones and our music. Now we have it all in one in our smartphones. But the iPod was a music device that actually, all it did was play music. You couldn't make phone calls or play games or anything on it. So they talk about their iPods. So this book is about 10 years old. So there's a few things that are a little dated, but not too much. I think it's okay. We just kind of have to remember that there is a little bit of dating here. What else do I want to say? Let's see. We're going to pick up with Coke and Pep and see what's going on with them. Hopefully they make it through their last day of school for the school year. And we are continuing with The Genius Files, Mission Unstoppable by Dan Gutman. I'll move it up close so you can see it. This is available on Hoopla through Salem Public Library. So if you want to follow along, and that would be fantastic, you absolutely should. Keeps your reading skills up. Download a copy of it so you can read right along with me. And so we're thanking Dan Gutman and HarperCollins Publishers for letting us use this book in this way. And this will go up, this is day 3, so this will be posted on Wednesday. And then after it's on Facebook, it will also show up on our YouTube channel, which is brand new to us, but you should check it out because we're going to be posting some good content there. All right, so that's last week's activities. Oh, okay, so let's get started. Chapter 5, Dr. Herman Warsaw and the Genius Files. Somebody certainly was trying to kill the McDonald twins, and this somebody would prove to be amazingly persistent. We need to rewind the story a bit here. Back to September 11th, 2001. A century from now, when kids learn about American history in school, it will probably be divided into everything that happened before 9/11 and everything that happened after 9/11. And it was on that tragic day that Dr. Herman Warsaw decided to take a cigarette break. This decision would change his life. In fact, this decision would ultimately change a lot of lives. Born in Poland, Dr. Warsaw was a brilliant man and one whose brain examined the world differently from the rest of us. As an amateur inventor, he had made a small fortune creating a GPS that people could have implanted under the skin of their dog or cat, so that if the pet ran away, it could be tracked down easily. With the royalties he earned from his invention, Dr. Warsaw didn't have to work for the rest of his life, but he offered his services as a consultant for $1 a year at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. America had been good to him. He wanted to give something back. Seems generous. Dr. Warsaw was an odd-looking sort. He was young at the time, barely 30, but he had the look of an old man. He wore baggy brown suits and a fedora as if he had stepped out of a 1940s gangster movie. He had the squinty-eyed look of a man who spent too much of his short life staring at computer screens instead of interacting with people in the real world. Smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day didn't help any. Oh, Dr. Warsaw had tried to quit. Lots of times. He tried hypnosis and acupuncture and patches and gums and just about every over-the-counter cure-all on the market. But nothing worked. He had to have a cigarette in his hand at all times, even if he wasn't smoking it. Lucky for him, it was the pull of that addiction that made Dr. Warsaw step out of his Pentagon office at 9:38 a.m. on September 11th, take the elevator down from the 3rd floor, and walk outside into the parking lot for a quick smoke. He had just flicked his Bic when the horrible roar of jet engines caused him to jerk his head upward. That sound was way too close. Planes weren't permitted to fly anywhere near the airspace above the Pentagon, the Capitol, the White House, or any top-level government building in Washington. But there it was, a plane diving out of the sky and heading toward him. 1 second later, American Airlines Flight 77 from Washington Dulles Airport, a Boeing 757, clipped a light pole at 350 miles an hour and slammed into the Pentagon less than 50 yards from where he was standing. He covered his eyes to shield them from the light and heat. It was terrifying. The plane hit the building with such force that it was literally swallowed up by the Pentagon itself. It entered so cleanly that for years afterward, conspiracy theorists were claiming that no plane had even struck the building. They said it had to have been an inside job. The government must have purposely set off a bomb. But Dr. Warsaw knew what happened, because he saw it with his own eyes. The nose of the plane tore right through his office. If he had been sitting at his desk at that moment, he would have been dead instantly. A huge fireball erupted, and the Pentagon was in flames. 126 people in the building died that day, plus 64 people on the plane. Less than an hour earlier, 2 planes had hit the World Trade Center towers in New York City. If there were still any doubts that America was under attack, they were gone. In a few short minutes, history would have to be rewritten. Dr. Warsaw sank to his knees involuntarily and looked at the cigarette in his hand. His life had been spared, and it was at that moment that he made a firm commitment to devote the rest of it to his country. As the sirens began to wail and the fire trucks pulled up outside the Pentagon, an idea flashed through Dr. Warsaw's brain. It was fleeting. One of those ideas that could have been lost in a moment if he'd been distracted. But it was an idea that would change the world. Dr. Warsaw pulled out the little digital recorder he kept in his pocket just for odd moments like this when inspiration struck. As smoke and flames spewed out of the ruins of the Pentagon, he pushed the record button and started to make some quick, clipped verbal notes. Nation under attack. Multiple problems. Nation divided. Unsolvable. No agreement. Society overwhelmed with complexity. Cannot see the forest for the trees. Older generation, inflexible, stagnant. Kids are moldable. Figure out solutions. Start over. Geniuses. Standardized test scores. Find them. These ramblings would have sounded like gibberish to anyone who happened to be listening. But later, Dr. Warsaw would sit down and synthesize his shorthand audio notes onto a 434-page manifesto titled, "The Only Way Out, the Simple Solution to America's Most Pressing Problems of the 21st Century." No, you can't find it on Barnes & Noble. Don't bother looking it up on Amazon. The Only Way Out was a top-secret document that was written for and distributed to a very small group of government officials. It would become to be known around Washington as the Genius Files. It would be impossible to reproduce Dr. Warsaw's entire document here. It would also bore you to tears if you had to read it word for word. But here's the summary on the final page. In conclusion, civilization in the early 21st century is facing multiple serious problems. We've got international terrorism, global climate change, economic meltdown, dependence on unstable oil supplies, a failing education system, senseless wars, loose nukes, insane dictators, drugs, hunger, obesity, cancer, dwindling water and oil supplies, poverty, unemployment, racism, and overpopulation. Our nation is divided, making these problems seem unsolvable. Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives, young and old, north and south, rich and poor can't agree on anything. And that's not even taking into account the various races, ethnic groups, and religions, each with their own worldview and self-interest. Nothing ever seems to get done to solve these problems. Our society is overwhelmed by the complexity of our situation. The problems are simply too complicated and entrenched for the current generation of leaders. They're paralyzed. It is time to start over with children. In Dr. Warsaw's view, the grown-ups of the world were too set in their ways to change and solve the complex problems they created. The only way to solve the problems would be for the United States government to seek out the smartest young people in the country and enlist them as problem solvers. Sometimes you can't fix things, he liked to say. You have to replace them. In other words, America would have to start over from scratch with young geniuses. And these geniuses needed to be identified from the earliest stage possible in order to cultivate and use their skills over the long term. How? It would be simple, really. In fact, the mechanism was already in place. The standardized tests routinely given each year to every American child in public school. All that was needed was to pick out the best and the brightest and recruit them to solve the nation's problems. Seems simple. As you might expect, this revolutionary idea was met with skepticism by the powers that be in Washington. Expecting kids to accomplish what the smartest adult minds in the world could not seemed outrageous to many. Some adults were, frankly, threatened by the idea. It would take a few years and a change in presidents for Dr. Warsaw's plan to get approval and funding. It appeared as a tiny earmark in the economic stimulus package that was signed into law in early 2009. And when the disgruntled senators were finished bickering over it, the funding was sliced in half. But finally, in the spring of 2009, after every child in America had been tested and retested during the school year, a very select group of children were chosen to be the first group of YAGs, Young American Geniuses. Proud parents all over the country received letters in the mail informing them that their children were among the smartest children in America. These special kids were more than simply gifted and talented. They would be enrolled in special advanced placement classes and enriched extracurricular activities the next school year. They would be put on the fast track to eventual college scholarships. They were touted as the leaders of tomorrow. What the parents were not told was that their children were being secretly recruited to carry out some of the government's most important and dangerous missions. Their kids would be like unmanned drones assigned to solve the problems that could not be solved by adults. These children were guinea pigs, and they came from all over the country. Small towns and big cities, white kids, black kids. It was like the old Armour hot dog jingle. Big kids, little kids, kids who climb on rocks, fat kids, skinny kids, even kids with chicken pox. I don't know that song, so I really couldn't say it very well, sorry. Kids like Coke and Pep McDonald. Chapter 6, Detention. Grab a sip of water first. Oh, so Daisy Ray's listening very intently up behind me. Rogue is actually sitting right in front of me. So he's getting this whole story. He would like to be one of the geniuses. Are you very smart? Yeah? Yeah, she's a pretty smart cat. All right, Chapter 6, Detention. The McDonald twins didn't know they had been selected to be part of a special program for gifted and talented students. A letter informing their parents of that fact had arrived at their house 2 months earlier, back in April. But unfortunately, Dr. McDonald assumed the letter was just another school fundraiser and threw it in the trash without opening the envelope. Now, it was June 18th, the last day of school, and nobody was paying attention in class. How could you? West Marine Middle School was air-conditioned, but for some mysterious reason, in June, the temperature in half the classrooms was up to over 90 degrees, and in the other half, you felt as if you were going to school in an igloo. Early that morning, when the teachers arrived at school, one of them found 2 backpacks labeled McDonald leaning against the front door. These were the backpacks that Coke and Pep had abandoned at the top of the cliff the day before. There was no note, no explanation of who had dropped them off. They were returned to the twins during homeroom. Later, Jimmy Erdman said to Coke in the hallway after 6th period. Jimmy Erdman was not part of the YAG program. He wasn't gifted or talented. Far from it. He was barely passing. Jimmy and Coke didn't have a whole lot in common. Jimmy had no interest in books, learning, science, or anything that involved too much thinking. He had little intellectual curiosity, but the two had known each other since first grade. Most people tend to drift away from their childhood pals as they develop new interests and new friends, but Coke and Jimmy never did. There was a comfort level there. It's easy to trust someone you've known all your life. Later, Coke replied and headed down the hall to the health room. The health teacher, Mrs. Audrey Higgins, had that look on her face. It was the look that said she hated her job, she hated her life, and she hated the kids she had to teach. And they hated her right back. Oh, that's not a good teacher. Today, we're going to learn how to brush our teeth correctly, Mrs. Higgins informed the class. Coke groaned, and Mrs. Higgins probably heard it. He found it inconceivable. The sixth graders had to be taught how to brush their teeth, or that precious class time would be wasted on something so commonsensical. He looked around to see if anybody else in the class saw the ridiculousness of it all. They just stared back at him blankly. Zombies. Mrs. Higgins was a tall woman with short hair. She squirted a dollop of hand sanitizer, which she always kept on her desk, and rubbed the stuff into her palms. Then she picked up a toothbrush. All right, you guys ready to learn how to brush your teeth, I guess? Grasp the handle firmly, Mrs. Higgins told the class, and always brush up and down, never side to side. Coke had no real problem with Mrs. Higgins' toothbrushing technique, but he did have an interest in busting chops, especially when it came to grown-ups. You're fine, you're fine. Sorry, we had a little interruption. Rogue really likes to cuddle with Griffin, my other dog, and Griffin does not always appreciate that, so he was grumbling at him. They're good now. Let's back to our story here. What's wrong with brushing from side to side, Mrs. Higgins? He asked politely. Mrs. Higgins stopped for a moment to look at Coke. She was used to kids like him, bored, super smart know-it-alls who amused themselves by asking dumb questions. If you brush from side to side, she explained slowly, as if he was developmentally challenged, your teeth will grow in crooked. That should be self-evident, Mr. McDonald. Should also have been the end of the discussion, but Coke couldn't let it drop. Why would they grow in crooked? Coke asked. If you put an equal amount of pressure on the teeth as you brush to the left, and an equal amount of pressure as you brush to the right, the pressure on both sides would be equal, and the teeth would have no reason to grow in anything but straight. Makes sense to me. Unless, of course, you're claiming that Newton's third law of motion is incorrect. That is, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. A few of the boys in the back snickered. They had no idea what Coke was talking about, but they could tell he was giving Mrs. Higgins a hard time. She looked at Coke wearily. She had had enough of him and his attention-getting devices. That's detention for you, McDonald. What? Coke shouted. What did I do? You're going to give me detention because I questioned you about how to brush teeth? Are you kidding me? It's the last day of school. I was just exercising my freedom of speech. Your freedom of speech ends at my ears, Mrs. Higgins said. This is child abuse. That's what it is. She ignored him. The bell rang and everybody pushed through the front door chanting the chorus of Alice Cooper's School's Out. Coke trudged to the detention room. Man, that would not be fun. Detention on the last day of school. It was a depressing, windowless room in the basement of the school, and on the whiteboard somebody had scrawled, "Pay attention and avoid detention." Coke was surprised to see one other student in the room, sitting in the second row. His sister. What are you in for? She asked Coke. Armed robbery? I questioned the philosophy behind Mrs. Higgins' toothbrushing technique, he replied. And you? Chewing gum. Pep said. Nice move, Coke said. Got a piece for me? I don't know about you guys. I'm going to sit right there for just a second. God, that seems really unfair on the last day of school to be in detention for such minor things. I don't know. I'm not a teacher, but on the last day of school, I don't think I'd send kids to detention for that. It's also interesting that it's only the McDonald kids. All right, back to the story. Pep opened her mouth to show him the only piece of gum she had. It just might be a long afternoon. Coke took a seat and opened his dog-eared copy of The Catcher in the Rye. He hadn't read a children's book since first grade when he decided they were too easy. This is totally unfair, Pep complained. What kind of teacher gives attention on the last day of school? We're probably the only ones left in the whole building. Everyone else is gone for the summer. A minute later, Mrs. Higgins came into the room. She was wearing white gloves. All West Marin Middle School students knew that Mrs. Higgins was germ-phobic and obsessive-compulsive about personal hygiene. That's probably why she became a health teacher in the first place. When she was feeling particularly paranoid, Mrs. Higgins would put on her gloves. Kids would make fun of her behind her back. When she saw Pep and Coke sitting there, she smirked. Coke refused to give her the satisfaction of eye contact. "How long will this be?" Pep asked Mrs. Higgins. "As long as it takes," the teacher replied. Pep slumped in her seat, looked at the door. It was wooden, with a thin sliver of a window in it, just a few inches wide. The school janitor, Mr. Roquefort, walked by pushing a broom. He glanced inside as he passed. Mr. Roquefort was a creepy-looking, extremely obese man with a big, bushy beard and mustache. As far as the students knew, he had never said a word to anybody, which led to all sorts of speculations and rumors about him. Some said he was ashamed because he couldn't speak English. Others insisted he was a deaf mute. The conspiracy crowd claimed that he had his tongue ripped while serving time in a Bolivian prison. Yikes. Everybody called him Bones because he was so fat. Her cell phone rang, and Mrs. Higgins rushed to open her pocketbook. She said hello on the third ring, but the call was dropped. "Excuse me," she said. "I'll be back." Mrs. Higgins went out into the hallway. The door closed behind her. Coke thought briefly about just picking up and walking out of there. What could Mrs. Higgins do? Suspend him? It was the last day of school. But then the lock on the door clicked. There was no escape. "What do you think janitors do over the summer?" Pep asked her brother. She had a way of caring about people in whom most other kids couldn't be less interested. "How do they support themselves?" "Bones is probably a part-time brain surgeon," Coke said. "Sweeping the floor and cleaning up kids' puke is his hobby." "Funny," his sister commented. "Actually, I think he might be retarded," said Coke. "You're not supposed to say retarded," Pep told her brother. "You're supposed to say mentally challenged." Whatever. Coke went back to the Catcher in the Rye. He didn't feel like debating the point. "Do you think Bones could have been one of those guys who tried to kill us yesterday?" Pep asked. Coke looked up from his book and thought for a moment. His brain was stuffed with so much data, he had nearly forgotten that 24 hours earlier, he and his sister had jumped off a cliff after being chased by lunatics in golf courts wearing bowler hats and armed with blowguns. A photographic memory only goes so far. "That's ridiculous," Coke said, looking back down at his book. "Janitors don't kill people." "Do you smell smoke?" Pep suddenly asked. "No," Coke replied, clearly annoyed with his sister. "Don't you have a book or something to read?" "I smell something," Pep insisted. "You're having an olfactory hallucination." "Women have a stronger sense of smell than men do, you know," Pep told him. Coke knew it was true. In third grade, he'd done a science project in which he had males and females sniff various substances to determine which gender was more sensitive to smell. The girls won easily. The project was written up in the local paper and even mentioned in a national science magazine. "So maybe the school will burn down and we can get out of here," Coke remarked. "You shouldn't joke about things like that." A few minutes passed and Coke suddenly looked up from his book. "Something's burning," he said, alarmed. "I told you I smelled smoke," Pep replied. They jumped up and saw puffs of smoke coming out of the vent in the back of the room. "We gotta get out of here," Coke said. "Where's Mrs. Higgins?" Pep asked. "Who cares about her?" Coke said with a snort. "Let's worry about us. She's the only one who can open the door for us," said Pep. She ran to the door and turned the knob. The door was locked. Coke tried to yank it open. Nothing. The door was made of thick wood, and it felt warm to the touch. Smoke could be seen through the narrow slit of a window. "The deadbolt is locked from the other side," Coke said. Smoke was pouring out of the vent now. It was starting to fill the room. The roaring sound of a fire could be heard, too. "Help!" Pep hollered. "Mrs. Higgins! We're locked up in here!" "She probably ran out of the building to save herself," Coke said. "She doesn't care about us. She hates kids." Pep was getting frantic. She let out a scream in a frequency that only girls can produce, another advantage females have over males. "Stop that!" Coke yelled, putting his hands over his ears. "We're going to suffocate in here," Pep yelled at him. "I'm going to call Mom and Dad on the cell." "You can't get a good signal in this room," Coke told her. "I've tried plenty of times. I'm going to break down the door. It's the only way out." Pep rolled her eyes as Coke paced off 10 steps and prepared to take a running leap at the door. "If you do your famous inflictor move, you're going to break your leg again," she said as she stepped aside to give him some running room. "I'm not going to kick it down," Coke told her. "I'm going to use my shoulder." He backed up as far as he could go and sprinted for the door. At the last second, he turned and leaped against the door. Then he crumpled to the floor. Did you dislocate your shoulder? Pep asked, running to him. Shut up. Smoke was sneaking under the door. The fire was in the hallway. In the detention room, it was becoming hard to see. Worse, it was getting hard to breathe. Coke was becoming enraged. Despite his sore shoulder, he got up and picked up a desk with both hands. Then he heaved it against the door. It clattered to the ground harmlessly, after doing no more damage than nicking off a little paint. Pep looked around frantically for something she could use to open the door. The fire extinguisher, she yelled as she ran across the room and lifted it off a hook on the wall. We'll die from smoke inhalation before the flames get to us. Coke yelled at her. The whole school could be burning down. You think you're going to put out the fire with a little fire extinguisher? No, she replied. We can use it as a battering ram. Coke immediately understood what his sister had in mind as she held the fire extinguisher against the wooden door. Newton's first law of motion states that every object in a state of uniform motion tends to remain in that state of motion unless an external force is applied to it. If they could put enough force against a single point on that door, they might be able to crash right through it. Coke picked up the desk again. Despite everything that was happening, he couldn't help but think how much fun it was to bust up stuff. Busting up stuff was one of the most fun things you could do. Building things is a long, slow, and difficult process. But busting up stuff was nothing but fun as long as you didn't have to clean up the mess afterward. He had often thought that the ideal career choice would be to work in the demolition business, blowing up old buildings and stadiums. The money probably wasn't very good, but nothing beat the thrill of demolishing things. Pep held the fire extinguisher against the door. Coke gave himself some running room and gripped the legs of the desk tightly. You ready? He asked. On 3. 1, 2, 3, they both hollered. Coke took a deep breath and made a run for the door, holding the desk in front of him like a battering ram. Pep closed her eyes and tensed her muscles to absorb the impact. When the top surface of the desk crashed against the fire extinguisher, it hit a seam in the wood and broke through, cracking the door in half and sending 2 pre-teenagers, a school desk, a fire extinguisher, and pieces of splinter wood into the hallway. But the hallway was engulfed in flames. And that's where we're going to stop for today. All right. So I've got a couple little things here on my... All right, we're going to do the serious one first. It's pretty scary stuff. They're stuck in the school. They're locked in seemingly on purpose. And there's a fire. That's pretty scary. So, it's just a fiction book. Nobody real's getting hurt here, I promise. But a great thing to do in this downtime would be to make or review your house, your family's fire escape plan. Know how you're going to get out if there is a fire in your home. It's really important to do. Make sure you know where your fire extinguishers are and how to use them, how to call the fire department, all that good important stuff. Even if you've done that recently, it never hurts to review it. So that's my serious activity for this one. All right, just a question for you. Before, Coke suggested that kids were smarter because they're born with a certain amount of brain cells, and those brain cells die off. By the time they're 40, like me, they've got nothing left, or just a zombie, which is entirely possible. And Dr. Warsaw had a similar theory that kids are the solution. They can find the answers to the problems. So my question for you guys today is, are kids smarter than adults? What do you think? If we let kids loose on some of these big problems in the world, do you think maybe they could come up with some answers that adults haven't thought of? I would love to hear your answers on that. Go ahead and post them in the comments on this video. And my next one, this is just a silly, if you need something to do. The kids in this book were singing Alice Cooper's School's Out, which is a very old song. It's not the song that we used to sing when I was in school on the last day of school. We had a different one. I don't know if that's something kids still do, but if you have a song you sing on the last day of school, I would love to hear it. So make a little video of yourself singing that song or just an audio recording and share it with me. That would be fantastic. This video has run very long and I apologize, but I hope you enjoyed what we were reading today. And I'll be back again tomorrow with a new reading. We're going to start with I think we're on chapter 7 tomorrow. So we're going to get started there tomorrow at 4:30. And I will see you guys all then. Thanks. Bye.